August 13th, 1961. The telephone on President John F. Kennedy's bedside table rang at 3:17 a.m. He was at the family compound in Hyannisport, Massachusetts, having retreated there for a weekend of rest after months of unrelenting pressure. The Bay of Pigs disaster in April. The disastrous Vienna summit with Khrushchev in June. The ongoing crisis over Berlin. The president was exhausted, his chronic back pain worse than usual, his mind burdened by the weight of decisions that could determine whether the world survived or perished in nuclear fire. He grabbed the phone on the second ring, instantly awake. Years of naval service in World War II had taught him to snap from sleep to full alertness in seconds. "Mr. President," said the voice of McGeorge Bundy, his national security advisor, calling from the White House Situation Room. "I'm sorry to wake you, but we have a situation in Berlin." Kennedy sat up, ignoring the stab of pain in his lower back. "What kind of situation?" "The East Germans have closed the border between East and West Berlin. As of midnight Berlin time, about 6 hours ago, they've blocked all crossing points. And sir, they're building something. Our people on the ground report that construction crews are laying barbed wire across the entire border. Thousands of workers, hundreds of trucks, concrete posts going up. It looks like they're building a barrier." Kennedy was silent for a moment, his mind racing through the implications. Berlin. The divided city deep in the heart of communist East Germany, a symbol of Western resolve, a flashpoint that could trigger World War III. For months, Khrushchev had been threatening to sign a separate peace treaty with East Germany, to end Western access to Berlin, to force the Allies out of the city. Kennedy had made it clear that any such move would be met with force, even at the risk of nuclear war. "How are the Soviets involved?" Kennedy asked. "We don't know yet, sir. The construction appears to be being carried out by East German forces, but Soviet troops are in the area, backing them up. It's clearly being done with Soviet approval, probably on Soviet orders." "What about our forces in Berlin? What about the West Berliners?" "Our garrison is on alert but hasn't been threatened. The East Germans are sealing the border between East and West Berlin, not blocking our access routes from West Germany. And the West Berliners, sir, they're gathering at the border, watching the construction. Some are trying to stop it, but the East German police are keeping them back." Kennedy stood, his mind already shifting into crisis mode. "I'm coming back to Washington. Have Air Force One ready at Otis Air Force Base in 2 hours. And Mac, get everyone together. Rusk, McNamara, the Joint Chiefs. I want a full briefing as soon as I arrive." "Yes, sir. One more thing, Mr. President. We're getting photographs from Berlin. Our people are documenting the construction. The first pictures should be ready by the time you land." "Good. I want to see them immediately." Kennedy hung up and sat on the edge of the bed, his mind working through the crisis. A barrier across Berlin. It was audacious, provocative, but also, he had to admit, clever. For months, East Germany had been hemorrhaging people, thousands fleeing every week through Berlin to freedom in the West. Doctors, engineers, teachers, skilled workers, the best and brightest of East German society, were voting with their feet, draining the communist state of its human capital. Khrushchev and the East German leader Walter Ulbricht had been demanding that the West do something to stop the refugee flow, had threatened to close the border by force. But Kennedy had assumed they would try to block Western access to Berlin, which would have triggered a military response. Instead, they were sealing the border between East and West Berlin, trapping East Germans in their own country, but leaving Western access routes intact. It was a solution to their refugee problem that didn't directly threaten Western interests. Brutal, yes. Inhumane, certainly. But not quite a casus belli, not quite worth risking nuclear war over. Kennedy felt a cold admiration for the strategy, even as he recognized its implications. Khrushchev had outmaneuvered him. "Jack," Bobby said, "what are you going to do?" "I don't know yet," Kennedy admitted. "I need to see what we're dealing with, need to understand exactly what they're building and why." Khrushchev is testing you, Bobby said. First the Bay of Pigs, then Vienna, now this. He thinks you're weak, thinks he can push you around. Kennedy looked up sharply. I know what he thinks. But this isn't about my ego, Bobby. This is about whether we're willing to risk nuclear war over a barrier that doesn't directly threaten our position in Berlin. It threatens our credibility, Bobby argued. If we let them seal off East Berlin, if we do nothing while they imprison an entire population, what message does that send? That we'll back down whenever the Soviets push? That our promises of freedom mean nothing? And if we tear down their barrier by force? Kennedy shot back. If we send tanks to knock down their wall, what happens then? The Soviets respond, we escalate, and suddenly we're in a shooting war in the middle of Europe. And from there, it's a short step to nuclear weapons. Is that what you want? Bobby was silent, knowing his brother was right, but hating the feeling of helplessness. Air Force One landed at Andrews Air Force Base at 9:45 a.m. Kennedy was driven directly to the White House, where his national security team was waiting in the cabinet room. Dean Rusk, the Secretary of State, sat at the table looking tired and worried. Robert McNamara, the Secretary of Defense, was reviewing documents with his characteristic intensity. General Maxwell Taylor, the President's military advisor, stood by the windows, staring out at the Rose Garden. McGeorge Bundy was coordinating the flow of information from the Situation Room. "Gentlemen," Kennedy said, taking his seat at the head of the table, "bring me up to speed. What exactly is happening in Berlin?" Bundy stepped forward with a folder. "Mr. President, as of 0100 hours Berlin time, the East German government closed all crossing points between East and West Berlin. They've deployed thousands of police and military personnel along the border, and they've begun construction of a physical barrier. Barbed wire, concrete posts, eventually we believe a concrete wall." "Why now?" Kennedy asked. Rusk spoke up. "The refugee crisis, Mr. President. East Germany was losing between 2,000 and 3,000 people per week through Berlin. In the first 7 months of this year, over 160,000 East Germans have fled to the West. The East German economy was collapsing. Ulbricht told Khrushchev that without action, the country would cease to exist." "And Khrushchev approved this?" "We believe so, sir. The operation is too large, too coordinated to have been done without Soviet approval. Soviet troops are providing backup security. This is a Soviet operation carried out by East German proxies." Kennedy nodded. "What are our options?" McNamara consulted his notes. "Military options are limited, sir. We could send tanks to the border, make a show of force. We could attempt to tear down the barrier, but any military action risks escalation. The Soviets have 20 divisions in East Germany. We have 1 brigade in West Berlin, essentially a tripwire force. If it comes to a fight, we can't win conventionally without reinforcements from West Germany, and that means widening the conflict." "What about our access to Berlin?" Kennedy asked. "Are they blocking our routes from West Germany?" "No, sir," Bundy replied. "That's the interesting part. They're sealing the border between East and West Berlin, but our access routes through East Germany remain open. Our convoys are still getting through. Our air corridors are still operational. They're not challenging our presence in West Berlin, just preventing East Germans from fleeing to West Berlin." Kennedy leaned back in his chair, his mind working through the implications. "So they're building a prison for their own people, but they're not directly threatening us or our allies in West Berlin." "That's correct, sir." "Show me the photographs," Kennedy said. Bundy opened the folder and spread a series of black and white photographs across the table. They had been taken by American intelligence officers in West Berlin, shot from upper-story windows and rooftops overlooking the border. Kennedy stood and walked around the table to examine them more closely. Bobby joined him, along with the other advisors. The photographs showed scenes of organized chaos. East German workers in civilian clothes and military uniforms, stringing barbed wire across streets. Concrete posts being driven into the ground. Trucks delivering materials. Police and soldiers standing guard, rifles at the ready, and in the background, crowds of West Berliners watching in shock and anger, some shouting, some weeping, some standing in stunned silence. Kennedy picked up one photograph and studied it closely. It showed a wide shot of the Brandenburg Gate, the iconic symbol of Berlin, with barbed wire being strung across the road in front of it. Soviet and East German flags hung from the gate. Armed guards stood at attention, and beyond the wire, the streets of West Berlin stretched into the distance, tantalizingly close but now impossibly far for those trapped on the eastern side. The room was silent as Kennedy examined the photographs. Everyone waited for him to speak, to give some indication of what he was thinking, what he was feeling. Finally, Kennedy set down the photograph and turned to face his advisors. His face was pale, his jaw set, his eyes hard. "This is obscene," he said quietly. "They're building a prison. They're walling in an entire population because they know that given a choice, given freedom, people will flee their communist paradise. They're admitting that their system only works if people are forced to stay at gunpoint." He picked up another photograph, this one showing a young couple separated by the barrier, reaching toward each other across the barbed wire. "Look at this. Look at what they're doing to their own people. Families divided, friends separated, people trapped in a police state because their government is terrified of losing them." "Mr. President," Rusk said carefully, "the question is what we do about it." "What can we do about it?" Kennedy asked, his back still to the room. "Really, what can we do? They're not blocking our access to Berlin. They're not threatening our forces. They're not violating the agreements that give us the right to be in West Berlin. They're building a wall on their side of the border, on their territory, to keep their people in." "It's a violation of human rights," Bobby said. "It's an outrage against freedom." "Yes," Kennedy agreed, turning back to face them. "It is. But is it worth a war? Is it worth risking nuclear annihilation? That's the question we have to answer." General Taylor spoke up. "Mr. President, if we do nothing, if we simply accept this wall, we'll look weak. The Soviets will be emboldened. They'll push further, test us more, and our allies will question our commitment to defending freedom." "And if we tear down the wall by force?" Kennedy asked. "If we send tanks to the border and knock down their barbed wire? What happens then, General?" Taylor was silent for a moment. "The Soviets would respond, sir. They'd have to, for their own credibility. And then we'd be in a shooting war in the middle of Europe." "Which could escalate to nuclear war," Kennedy said. "Which could mean the end of everything. So I ask again, is this wall worth that risk?" He walked back to the table and picked up the photograph of the Brandenburg Gate, studying it intently. "Do you know what I see in these photographs? I see the failure of communism. I see a system so bankrupt, so oppressive, so contrary to human nature that it can only survive by imprisoning its own people. This wall isn't a sign of communist strength. It's a sign of communist weakness." "Then we should say that," Bundy suggested. "We should make that argument to the world." "Yes," Kennedy agreed. "We should. But we should also be clear-eyed about what this wall means for us, for our strategy. Khrushchev has found a solution to his refugee problem that doesn't directly threaten our interests. It's brutal and inhumane, but it's not a casus belli. He's daring us to respond with force, betting that we won't risk war over a barrier that doesn't actually threaten our position in Berlin." "So we do nothing?" Bobby asked, frustration evident in his voice. "I didn't say that," Kennedy replied. "I said we don't respond with military force, but there are other responses. We can condemn this wall in the strongest possible terms. We can use it as propaganda, as proof that communism fails when people are free to choose. We can strengthen our commitment to West Berlin, make it clear that we'll defend the freedom of West Berliners even if we can't immediately help those trapped in the East. And we can wait." "Wait for what?" Rusk asked. "Wait for this wall to become what it truly is, a monument to communist failure. Kennedy said. Wait for it to become such an embarrassment, such a symbol of oppression, that it undermines the communist cause more effectively than anything we could do militarily. Wait for the day when the people of East Berlin and East Germany rise up and tear it down themselves. He set down the photograph and looked around the table at his advisors. Gentlemen, I know this isn't satisfying. I know it feels like we're not doing enough, like we're accepting an outrage. But we have to think strategically. We have to ask ourselves, what serves our interests and the interests of freedom in the long run? And the answer is not a war over a wall, not a nuclear confrontation over barbed wire. The answer is patience, resolve, and faith that freedom will ultimately triumph over tyranny. What about the people trapped in East Berlin? Bobby asked quietly. What do we tell them? Kennedy's face was grim. We tell them the truth. That we can't free them today, that we can't tear down the wall without risking a war that could destroy Berlin and everything else. But we also tell them that we won't forget them, that we won't abandon them, that we'll keep the flame of freedom alive in West Berlin as a beacon of hope. And we tell them that someday, somehow, that wall will come down. That evening, he sat in the Oval Office. The photographs from Berlin spread across his desk. He picked up the one showing the Brandenburg Gate, studying it again in the fading light. His secretary, Evelyn Lincoln, knocked and entered. Mr. President, it's time for your address. Kennedy looked up. Do you know what bothers me most about this, Evelyn? It's not that they built the wall, it's that we can't tear it down. It's that we have all this power, nuclear weapons, armies, the strongest economy in the world, and we can't help those people trapped behind that barbed wire. We can't free them without risking a war that could kill millions. So we have to watch, have to accept it, have to tell ourselves that we're being strategic and patient, when really we're just admitting that our power has limits. You're doing the right thing, Mr. President, Mrs. Lincoln said. You're keeping the peace. You're preventing a war. Am I? Kennedy asked. Or am I just rationalizing our inability to act? How do you tell the difference between wisdom and weakness, Evelyn? How do you know when you're being prudent and when you're just being afraid? He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Washington Monument in the distance. I keep thinking about those people in the photographs. That elderly woman reaching across the barbed wire. That young couple separated, the families divided, and I keep asking myself, what would I want America to do if I were them? Would I want prudence and patience, or would I want action, even at the risk of war? You can't save everyone, Mr. President, Mrs. Lincoln said quietly. You can only make the best decisions you can with the information you have, trying to serve the greater good. Kennedy turned back to her and smiled sadly. He picked up the photograph one more time, then placed it in his desk drawer. Come on, let's go deliver this speech. Let's explain to the American people why we're not tearing down that wall and hope to God we're making the right decision. The speech was delivered from the Oval Office at 8 p.m. Kennedy spoke for 15 minutes, explaining the situation in Berlin, condemning the wall as an offense not only against history, but an offense against humanity, and reaffirming America's commitment to West Berlin and to the cause of freedom. But he also made it clear that the United States would not respond with military force, that the wall, while outrageous, did not threaten vital American interests in a way that justified risking nuclear war. We cannot, Kennedy said, his voice firm but tinged with regret, accept a permanent division of the German people, but neither can we risk the destruction of Berlin, of Germany, of Europe, and perhaps of the world itself, in a reckless attempt to tear down this barrier by force. We must be patient, we must be resolute, and we must have faith that the values we cherish, freedom, dignity, human rights, will ultimately prevail over the forces of tyranny and oppression. But Kennedy stood by his decision. In private conversations over the following days, he returned again and again to the photographs, to the images of the wall being built, to the faces of the people trapped behind it. A wall is a hell of a lot better than a war, he told his brother Bobby one evening as they sat in the president's private quarters. That's what I keep telling myself. A wall is ugly. A wall is inhumane. A wall is an admission of communist failure. But a wall doesn't kill anyone. A war would kill millions. Do you think history will judge you well for this decision? Bobby asked. Kennedy was quiet for a long moment. I don't know. Maybe historians will say I should have been tougher, should have forced the issue, should have torn down that wall no matter the cost. Or maybe they'll say I was right to be cautious, right to avoid a war that could have destroyed civilization. I honestly don't know. He stood and walked to the window, looking out over the south lawn. But I'll tell you what I do know. I know that wall is going to stand there as a monument to everything that's wrong with communism. Every day it stands, it's going to remind the world that the communist system can only survive by imprisoning its own people. And every day it stands, it's going to build pressure, build resentment, build a desire for freedom that eventually, someday, will become unstoppable. You think it'll come down? Bobby asked. I know it will, Kennedy said with conviction. I don't know when. Maybe not in my lifetime. But someday, the people of Berlin will tear down that wall themselves. And when they do, it'll be a greater victory for freedom than anything we could achieve by force today. What Kennedy said when he saw the first pictures of the Berlin Wall being built, captured in his own words across multiple conversations. His initial reaction in the cabinet room, this is obscene. They're building a prison. They're walling in an entire population because they know that given a choice, given freedom, people will flee their communist paradise. His strategic assessment? Do you know what I see in these photographs? I see the failure of communism. I see a system so bankrupt, so oppressive, so contrary to human nature that it can only survive by imprisoning its own people. This wall isn't a sign of communist strength. It's a sign of communist weakness. His difficult admission, is this wall worth risking nuclear annihilation? That's the question we have to answer. His decision, we can't tear down the wall without risking a war that could destroy Berlin and everything else, but we also won't forget them, won't abandon them. And someday, somehow, that wall will come down. His private doubt to Evelyn Lincoln, how do you tell the difference between wisdom and weakness? How do you know when you're being prudent and when you're just being afraid? His painful recognition. We have all this power, nuclear weapons, armies, the strongest economy in the world, and we can't help those people trapped behind that barbed wire. We can't free them without risking a war that could kill millions. His rationalization to Bobby. A wall is a hell of a lot better than a war. A wall is ugly. A wall is inhumane. A wall is an admission of communist failure. But a wall doesn't kill anyone. A war would kill millions. His prophecy. I know that wall will come down. I don't know when. Maybe not in my lifetime. But someday the people of Berlin will tear down that wall themselves. And when they do, it'll be a greater victory for freedom than anything we could achieve by force today. Kennedy was right. The Berlin Wall stood for 28 years, a scar across the heart of Europe, a symbol of division and oppression. But on November 9th, 1989, the people of Berlin, East and West together, tore it down with their bare hands, with hammers and chisels, with joy and tears. Kennedy didn't live to see it. He was assassinated in Dallas in November 1963, just 2 years after the wall was built. But his prophecy proved accurate. The wall that seemed so permanent, so immovable in August 1961, eventually crumbled under the weight of its own contradictions, under the pressure of people demanding freedom. And when it fell, it vindicated Kennedy's decision not to tear it down by force in 1961. Because the wall's peaceful collapse, driven by the will of the German people themselves, was indeed a greater victory for freedom than anything that could have been achieved through military action 28 years earlier. Kennedy understood something fundamental about the Cold War, that some battles couldn't be won through force, that some victories required patience, that some monuments to tyranny were more powerful as symbols of oppression than as targets for military action. It was a hard wisdom bought at the cost of watching people suffer behind barbed wire and concrete. But it was wisdom nonetheless, and it may have saved the world from nuclear war.